protein's popularity have staying power among consumer diets? That's what we're digging into. Who's going to win? Who's going to lose in the business of agriculture? It's going to be a great topic. Attention farmers. Want quick answers to your toughest questions? Meet Agvisor Pro, the innovative mobile app designed just for you. Tap into a network of trusted experts and industry professionals right from your phone. Whether you're seeking advice on crop management or the latest equipment, Agvisor Pro connects you with the answers you need to succeed. Best of all, it's free, so download it on iOS or your Android device. Don't miss out on expert insights that can transform your farming experience. Download Agvisor Pro today and start connecting with the knowledge you need to thrive in the field. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. I've got a great guest for you. His name is Nicholas Fereday. He is Executive Director of Food and Consumer Trends with RaboResearch. RaboResearch, a division of Rabobank. Rabobank, the world's largest agricultural lender. Got a lot of global insights here, but Mr. Fereday is of British origin, but he resides in the United States of America. He puts out a weekly or more than that, monthly, more than that, it looks like, assessment of where things are going with consumers as it pertains to American agriculture and even global agriculture. Some really good stuff. We're talking about protein. Protein has been very popular for the last several years. We've got a few things that are going to impact this. RFK Jr. has a war on processed foods. Professor Fereday has a lot of stuff about ultra-processed foods. Mr. RFK Jr., if he has a role in the new administration, which it looks like he's going to, has a real thing against seed oils. Mr. RFK Jr., also, if he's got a role in Health and Human Services, Food and Drug Administration, seems to favor things like meat. So that's going to bode well for protein. Also, anti-obesity medications are going to probably bode well for increased protein consumption. So we're talking about all things protein, particularly as it pertains to animal protein, but also that which we derive from plant sources, because they are all agricultural products. Nicholas Fereday, thanks for being here on the Business of Agriculture.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for the invitation.
You put out a monthly. I know you put out some other stuff, but I like to read your stuff. And you said protein power, the perennial trend. Okay, it taught me in livestock ration classes when I was putting together rations for livestock. There's 6 nutrients in all things that we consume, animals and humans. There's the micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and water. Then there's the macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fat. We went pretty overboard on carbohydrates for a while. That might be why so many Americans look like livestock, frankly. They were advised to eat 10 and 12 servings of grain and bread products per day, and by golly, they look like they're fat and ready to go slaughter. Then all of a sudden, the low-carb thing came about maybe a decade or so ago, and then the gluten thing, I guess, was a decade or so ago. The low-carb was before that. The gluten, no gluten, I'm gluten-free kind of thing came about, and we started pushing back toward proteins and fats. At the same time, fat has gotten less demonized. Nina Teicholz, author of Big Fat Surprise, was one of my guests about 2 months ago on this very show, and we talked about that. A lot of things trending toward increased protein consumption. Asking the question, does protein's popularity have staying power? I think it does. You?
Yeah, I also agree with you. So I hope we don't agree on everything. Otherwise, it might be quite a dull podcast. But you're absolutely right. You know, when we look at consumer trends, we kind of see consumers going through this love-hate relationship. And at the start of the century, we saw Atkins come back and everything was all low carb. And more recently, things like the ketogenic diet, which is a lot more fat friendly. You know, the consumer's always after the new thing, and they get bored. And so there's a bit of a cycle. But it seems when I started to look at stuff that we seem to have got stuck on protein, and maybe we're having an extended run. Maybe things will pass. This, like most trends, they come to an end. But as I wrote in the note, which you've kindly mentioned, there seem to be a number of factors that you listed, whether it's the anti-obesity medications, such as Wegovy or Ozempic, the ultra-processed foods debate, that kind of tell me that there are further momentum to keep protein front of mind and very much front of pack for consumers.
You know what's interesting, and you follow this. I mean, I do too. I always say there's a million people that can get up and talk about grain markets. I can talk about grain as it's being processed into how the consumer eats it and where they are. I'm more of a marketplace guy, and I've been paying attention for a long time. And in my travels and my reading and whatever, the protein thing isn't as outlandish. I mean, the Miami Beach diet, or for God's sakes, the sit and starve, and what is the thing you read about now?
Yeah. It's not crazy in the same way. People get protein in a way that they may not get the cabbage soup diet or something.
Yeah, or controlled fasting, or fasting for days that end in G, or whatever the hell it is. There's always something about that. The protein thing doesn't seem screwy like the orange juice or the grapefruit or the like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things on that. First is that it seems to have this health halo, protein does, in a way that fats and carbs don't. So we kind of talk about good carbs and bad carbs, or high fats with high cholesterol and so on. But with protein, it's less nuanced, right? It's always very much the more, the better. I mean, if neither of us are nutritionists, if we were nutritionists or healthcare practitioners, we'd be saying we shouldn't be talking about food in its components, but as a whole foods and whatever. But the consumer doesn't seem to have got that message. Macros very much seem to rule right now.
You just said you and I aren't dietitians or nutritionists, but so much of what alleged dietitians and nutritionists have believed or been taught, because I think in anything regarding healthcare, and particularly with the whole COVID thing, I became convinced a lot of people that work in the industry generally called health are very good at parroting or reciting what they were told in their training. And, it took somebody like Nina, who was my guest in that episode a couple of months ago, to really go against the grain, because you got told from the 60s on, in the 70s. I grew up in the 70s. I mean, I'm not as young as you. You look like you're about 25, 26, but I'm 55. So growing up is, if you're watching this, by the way, I was joking. But if you're listening, Mr. Fereday is about probably my age. Okay. So anyway, the whole low fat thing, it had, as one of my guests a long time ago called it, vertical knowledge. You know that eating dietary fat is bad for you because you've always known it. And those things become vertical knowledge that you've always known, that even though it's not true, dietary fat does not make you fat. You need a certain amount of fat. Babies need fat for their brain development. Putting a baby on skim milk sends them to a lifetime of dumbness. I mean, there's a real thing. But you never had a lot of misdiagnosis on protein. That's why it almost seems like it's got all, like you said, good fat.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I mean, again, I'm not a nutritionist. I did a 3-month online course, so that maybe I have more knowledge than the average person. But it's I think it's interesting how little most medical practitioners are taught on nutrition. And of course, to your point, they do parrot what they're taught, because that's their starting point. But it is kind of shocking, the lack of knowledge around nutrition amongst the experts. But having said that, there are a lot of people in the field who do live and breathe this stuff, and it is an accumulation of knowledge. It is kind of shocking as an outsider how little we know about nutrition, right? Yeah. And how much we're still to discover. So, for example, the microbiome wasn't a thing, and now it's a big thing. Yeah. and so on and so on. And so we don't necessarily think through these things in the way that we necessarily should. And so where does that leave the consumer? And then it just comes to the cliches, right? We're told to eat eggs, and now we're not told to eat eggs, and now it's back, and so on and so on.
Yeah, by the way, you just said something really interesting, Nicholas. You said that what we're talking about is the consumer, whether it's hundreds of years ago or yesterday, they tend to go with what's easy. They go with what's in front of them, and also they're tremendously easily influenced. I mean, it works. If you've got a body, and this is what this week's, I'm recording this in December, the episode I just released about RFK Jr. and processed foods, there's so much bastardized information out there because the companies that profited from it have no motivation to change it. If you're a margarine maker, if you're making margarine and some entity says, it turns out butter's bad for you, fake butter made out of vegetable oil and some hydrogenated palm seeds and whatever the hell it is I put in margarine, is better for you. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're a consumer, you still want to slather a bunch of something goopy stuff on your biscuits. So you get told this, and you're like, well, see, I'm being healthy, which you're not, but it works perfectly when you think about it. Consumers want what they want. People generally go for the path of least resistance. And if you tell them, hey, you can keep slathering that margarine on there, it turns out it's actually good for you to do that. And if you're the margarine company, all you had to do is pay a scientist to release some studies saying that, that's where the thing, we're not talking this like yesterday. It's been going on for 60 years this way.
Yeah, I mean, there is, for sure. I mean, when it comes to ultra processed foods, there seems to be two camps right now. The people are saying we have enough data, enough, research that we need to act and do something and advise consumers against them. And then you have another camp that's saying, well, we know there's a lot of, associations and correlations, but that doesn't tell us about causation. And until we understand what the real mechanisms are, is there something about highly processed foods that relates to the degree of processing that is causing poor health outcomes? Until we know that, then how on earth can we advise the consumer on what to do? Because we don't know. And so there could be lots of unintended consequences. So I feel there are two camps right now. And there's a danger, Damian, I feel, that by focusing too much on the processing, we're forgetting about some of the problems with the basic nutrients, right? The ingredients. And so we're forgetting to focus on, we already know that we shouldn't be eating too many foods that are high in sugar, salt, and fat, right? That's, and by focusing too much on the processing, we may forget part of the story. The ultra-processed foods story should not be seen as a replacement for existing dietary advice, but it should be, to what extent can it supplement it and tell us something new about the degree of processing that is leading to further health outcomes, bad health outcomes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to get into the processed food angle. We're talking about, does protein's popularity have staying power? His name's Nicholas Fereday. He's with RaboResearch division of Rabobank. If you're listening to this, I want you to think about this. Here we are. It's 2025. A new year brings hope for improved outcomes on your farming operation. One way to achieve that is through the high-tech plant nutrition provided by Redox Bio-Nutrients, a family-owned company in business since 1994. That's right. They're in their 31st year. Redox provides superior nutrition with biostimulants focused on maintaining plant charge balance. What? Plant charge balance? All nutrients have a positive or negative charge. If you maintain charge balance, maintaining your charge balance will allow plants to focus on yield and quality with improved performance come harvest time. You can find out more, including detailed product information in the Redox Grows podcast, including episodes with me. That's right. I've been on the redoxgrows.com, where you find it, Redox Grows podcast. Go to redoxgrows.com, redoxgrows.com. It's a new year. Change up what you're doing for better results. I believe protein has staying power, and it will come at the expense of processed foods. All it took was RFK Jr. about September, started saying, I'm going to run for president. I'm going to make America healthy again. And then by October, he says, I'm throwing my support to Donald Trump. And then it became this movement. You keep up with this. You're around, you travel, so do I. I have people at the holidays saying, hey, now what's this deal on seed oils? Because they don't know. I mean, an ag guy like me, I said, that's a generic term that they came up with. And I said, frankly, it's like factory farm or industrial agriculture. It's now become salacious to say the word seed oils. It means oil derived from things like soybeans, canola, sunflower, or to a lesser extent, even corn oil. And so I think there's a real movement here. It could get squashed. General Mills, Mondelez, Kraft Heinz, and 6 other food companies can just kind of put their hammer down and lobby up. But I think there's a real movement here that boxed food loses out, and of all things, meat. And this is where I think a lot of folks are going to be in a quandary, Mr. Fereday. They were told for the last 30 years that if you ate plants, it was good for the environment and good for you. And now you're going to be told, oh, wait, meat is good, protein is good, but you know what? It might come from an animal source. And some of those people are like, wait a minute, I thought I was a vegan. There's going to be a little quandary for a few folks among us. But I think that really there's going to be a trade-off of calories, even more so moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the nuance is lost in the conversation, right? In the headlines. I think, Damian, the interesting story is that, yes, protein consumption has risen. If you look at the USDA statistics, despite all the wobbles and issues around plant-based foods, it has risen something like 23 pounds per person, over the last decade. So there has been this incremental increase. But what we're seeing is the explosion of the interest in protein across the supermarket aisles and at restaurants. And it's in the kind of the non-traditional protein foods, if you like. You're getting protein popping up in pasta sauces, in snack bars, in your frozen waffles for breakfast. And some of this is from plant-based sources, and some of it is from, dairy sources like, whey protein isolates and stuff. And, you don't have to go to trade shows. To your point, you can just walk around, you can talk to people, but they're seeing it everywhere. And it's almost like there's a protein arms race going on with who can have the biggest amount of grams of protein in their product. And incorrectly, but in the eyes of the consumer, the more the better, right? And which is a really interesting point. Why is that? And that's where the health halo comes in, because we do reach a limit. It isn't a magical amount of food where the calories don't count or protein. Right. Your biology comes into play.
And to your point that of the macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, fat, since food marketing became modern food marketing, and I'll go back at least in my lifetime and yours, it was the labeling, the push was only so many grams of fat, or only so much percentage of fat, or only so many calories of fat. Yeah. And like you said, good fat, bad fat. Then avocados started becoming popular 20 or 30 years ago mostly because we started eating more Mexican food and a growth of our Hispanic population. And what did avocados do? A brilliant thing. Avocados are good fat. Now that's good fat. That's not bad fat.
Yeah.
But to your point, all the labeling was always low fat, no fat, reduced fat. And then it became the anti-carb thing, Michelob Ultra. I've got some of that crap in my refrigerator for a friend. And God knows I don't want it, but it's because it was low carb beer. And now you got high protein. Nothing says reduced protein chicken. Nothing says low protein steak. It's all about how much protein.
Which is a wonderful marketing message, right? Because it's a lot easier to tell people to consume more of something than less of something.
Jim really like to do that. Would you answer me this? You and I, neither of us are nutritionists, but we've already pointed out that some who are it should be met with some skepticism. At some point, you can't consume. You can't even assimilate or digest any more protein. I think that there's a point where if you ate only protein, somehow you were able to do that, none of the other five nutrients. I think that there's actually some studies that it's bad. It would be bad for you.
Yes. Yeah, in all cases, right? I mean, you can't survive on. It is not a balanced diet to eat pure just protein, right? You need all the other things as well. We do have an appetite for protein in the way that we have an appetite for carbs and fats and other things. And so, it is that Aristotle's, golden mean type thing. But when it comes to the marketing, the story is certainly to eat more. The dietary guidelines or the official advice hasn't changed for decades. It's a certain, a number of, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Well, now your one article, I want to point this out. Your article said in general, it still says the same amount of protein. Somebody like Nina and somebody that's critical of the dietary guidelines for Americans, they've been around for almost 44 years. Yeah. They do change every 5 years. So while you say it stayed the same, it might have stayed the same on the amount of protein, but the guidelines recommended ungodly amounts of carbohydrates. And then they still now are pushing this thing that we need 5 or 6 servings of fruits and vegetables. And there's even talk that we need to, subsidize production of vegetables, which is kind of an interesting thing because I always point out, the biggest amount of wasted production in all of the globe is the produce section. I mean, we waste more than half of what we produce in that area. Making more of it is not going to cause consumers to eat more of it. It just won't.
No, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think there's a valid criticism around the kind of the slow pace of change of government and policies and stuff. If you think how long it took to get trans fats out of the food system, once they were almost 100% proved how damaging they were. The protein number is one that hasn't changed, and that's why it's come in for a lot of criticism. Because to Nina's point and to other points, like Dr. Attia, who's a very popular book, it's like, this is, you're ignoring, to what extent are you guys ignoring or discounting, 4 decades of research? And I think that's where it comes in and gets interesting. And similarly, when you look at other research, which kind of suggests that at a population level, that our diet has become diluted of protein over time. Yeah. We've kind of, to your point, we've kind of overindulged, if that's the right word, on the fats and the carbs, and protein has become diluted. And to what extent that has, is not a good thing.
By the way, I keep saying Professor Fereday. In all,
I love it.
In all fairness, though, you actually work, as opposed to the professors. You actually work, so it's not fair to call you a professor, because that would be that you're a slacker that just like gets paid to pontificate and smoke a pipe and have your underlings do all the work for you.
I love that image. Maybe that could be a future role. But yeah, I work at a bank, at the Rabobank, for sure. I am not a professor, not even a doctor in that sense. But fascinated by this subject because, the science is evolving, consumer trends are evolving, and there is so much misinformation and confusion that it does create this gray space, in which we all have to operate and try and fathom out, what's really going on.
Hey, ag friends, we're going to return to this awesome discussion in a second, but I got to share some information with you about my new sponsor, Gripp. That's right. Gripp is a company that can help you run your farming operation or your agribusiness more smoothly. Gripp. It's ag's easiest way to track anything and everything. Safeguard your important records. Keep up with your assets. Automate your equipment reminders. Gripp is a familiar chat-like interface. It's loved by farmers and agribusiness people. It's so simple, anyone can use this. Even your grandpa who's still using his flip phone is going to say, hey, give me an iPhone instead. It's no wonder that farmers are ditching handwritten notes and texting and instead turning to Gripp. Keep your critical knowledge and conversations on your agricultural operation at your fingertips. No app, no password is required. Get a grip on your operation this spring. New subscribers get 20% off with code Damian20. That's right, my name, Damian20. Go to gripp.ag. That's GRIPP.ag to learn more. Nick, another thing I said, we continue to ask the question, does proteins popular have staying power? I say yes, it does. Okay, I'm going to give a couple other things. I wrote my book. It came out 5 years ago, so I'm granted using some old numbers, but not that old numbers. We are around 220 pounds of meat consumption per year here in America. Now, that number might be down a little bit because of some inflation, because meat tends to be, and eggs even, are expensive now. But that doesn't count eggs. That counts protein as in, it was either a chicken or a pig or whatever. Essentially, that was almost 100 pounds of chicken, about 50 pounds of pork, and about 60 pounds of beef. Those are your rough numbers on consumption per year. Then there's another 16 pounds of fish and another 16 pounds of turkey. So, I just want you to think about that. So we're in excess of 220 pounds of animal protein in the United States per American. And even with inflationary pressures at the grocery store, I don't know that those numbers have come down much, but I think the ultra-processed food, the push against that is going to keep those numbers up. And another one that you wrote an article about, anti-obesity medications.
Yeah.
If you are on anti-obesity medication, there's a risk that you go from being fat to not as fat. You don't go down to being like all of a sudden, a Kenyan marathon runner, but you do lose weight, but you lose muscle mass. So those patients that are on anti-obesity medications, Ozempic being one of the more popular ones, Wegovy, I can't remember the names of the others, you lose muscle mass. So they're being advised, beef up your protein consumption even though you're not eating as much food, make sure that more of it's from a protein source because of muscle loss. Speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting is, people on these medications do lose weight. They're taking in less calories, eating less food, and successfully lose body mass. What they didn't sign up for was to lose muscle mass.
Right,
they wanted to lose body fat, but not the muscle mass. And so they are looking, people on these drugs are looking to kind of incorporate more protein into their diet to kind of help offset that. By itself, you can't just eat protein. You have to exercise more, resistance training and strength training to kind of keep the muscles in check. So it's not a solution just to eat more protein by itself. And so that is definitely one of the future drivers. And then it comes down to a question, well, how many people are on these medications and how many people are likely to be on them in the future? And it's come as a big surprise to many people, Damian, that the number of people on these drugs is way more than people thought when it kind of became headline news in the food industry about a year ago.
Yeah. And the reason for that is, first off, the drugs are very expensive, but I actually know a person who's on it, and he was getting like a trial, almost like the drug dealer down the road that wants to make sure you get them and get hooked, because you've got to stay on it. That's the one thing. All my reading tells me that once you go off of Wegovy, or I can't remember the names of all these products, you've got a real high propensity, high likelihood to revert right back.
Absolutely. I mean, like any drug, Damian, if you stop taking it, it stops working. So you shouldn't be surprised by that. I think it's interesting, a year ago when it kind of became headline news in the food industry, it was downplayed the potential impact on food because there are only two manufacturers of these types of medications, and supply constraints would limit how many people would be on it. What no one really anticipated was the fact that because the drugs are in shortage, they went on the shortage list with the FDA, who then gave approval to these outfits called compounding pharmacies to produce identical equivalents of these drugs, which were then being sold at a much lower cost, $300, $400 a month, by telehealth companies. And that's how the market's kind of exploded. And we're now hearing surveys are coming up around, maybe 6%, 10% of the adult population. So we're talking 20 million US adults. And if those adults are driving the food purchasing decision-making of a household, then the impact can be even larger indeed. And that's why they become headline news.
And again, it hasn't even touched. I did an episode a few months ago, dear listener, viewer, go back and check it out. I was with my friend Todd Thurman, who co-chairs the Business of Ag Success Group with me. By the way, if you want to make a big change in 2025, you should consider becoming a member of the Business of Ag Success Group. $99 a month. We meet every other Friday online. We bring on guests. We talk about issues impacting agriculture. No long-term subscription. And it's going to help you out. It's going to help you stay in tune with the agricultural professional network. And it's led by me and Todd, so we'll keep it interesting. Hell, I might get Nick on there. I don't think I've ever had a British person come on. Okay. I tell you what, if I could get a British person, it would either be Posh Spice or Nicholas Fereday, whoever would be willing to come on the Business of Ag Success Group.
That's the most flattering quote I've ever heard about me, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm compared you to Posh Spice, and you know what? And I tell you what, I'm one of those Americans. Because I have such a disdain for the baby boom generation, I actually never say anything positive about the Beatles. I just can't find it in my soul to do it. Now, the Spice Girls, I can get behind the Spice Girls, but not the Beatles. All right. One of the things that could happen on this protein thing is then those that are conflicted because they want to believe in RFK Jr. and they want to be against processed food, or they protested outside of the Kellogg's cereal offices in Battle Creek, Michigan. That happened last month, by the way. I think they're going to go straight to, okay, I'm all on board with this protein thing. I'm going to do only plant-derived proteins. And so I do think there is a real opportunity for the plant-derived proteins. And I don't think it's necessarily synthetic meat. I think pulses have a real chance to win here. Lentils, edible beans, pea products, if you're a garbanzo bean grower or a lentil producer, if you're in Montana, the prairie provinces, I think you take this whole movement for protein, also play up the better for the environment thing, which is, I don't believe, and digestibility and good for the environment because we get so many tons per acre. I think you take this and run like hell with it because it plays into everything. It's not ultra processed. It's not in a box like those evil carbohydrates. I think you not only run with it, you start pushing that pulse crops start being used more in processed foods as a healthier than the whole evil carbohydrate thing. That's where I think that there's a winner.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We talked about the gray areas, and you kind of, if you want to be nerdy and have a Venn diagram, you kind of feel that something like pulses kind of sit in the sweet spot where they answer, they provide a solution to a lot of the issues that you just raised. I don't think anyone is going to object to people advocating and marketing more for varying their diet, embracing more pulses and legumes. It's kind of like one of the positive aspects of the gluten-free trend was that it opened the world up to, quinoa and all these other fantastic things that people, to help diversify their diets. And of course, they're much more affordable during a cost of living crisis. So absolutely on that front.
Took me 4 years to realize it wasn't quinoa. It was quinoa. Yeah. I'm like, what the hell's quinoa? And someone finally said, hey, you silly country boy, it's quinoa.
Yeah. I think the challenge, Damian, is, to what extent the food industry, not the big food guys, but, the rest of the food system is actually, nimble, agile enough to pick up on these trends, right? Because we talked about criticizing, ultra processed foods, but then that means that foods that aren't ultra processed, the minimally processed, or the products that are traditionally processed, that have been part of food cultures for generations, they haven't really leapt on the opportunity around this. So if you walked around a trade show, if we went around to Natural Products Expo West or something, Damian, and we asked people, what are you doing about marketing your product as minimally processed, they would look at you blankly. Yeah. And that could be that's a lost opportunity. And it could be because they don't feel the consumer's talking about it. But if you and I, Damian, went to a pet food trade show, processing is all those people talk about. They want to boast about how their cat food and pet food is minimally processed and good. So in some ways, the consumer is already primed if they're pet owners.
Yeah, what's interesting is, you can read the articles every year, spending, and during the COVID thing, spending on pets, and we're guilty of it. We don't have children, and we do okay. We're financially not poor, so we have 2 very well cared for doggies, and that thing of course, the one company called Farmer's Dog had, and I think. And they've shown him feeding a dog like a $6 tube of meat and carrots. And I'm like, our dogs were farmer dogs growing up, and they ate that stuff, but it was like whatever was left in the crock pot. I mean, it wasn't that we bought it from some online place. Anyway, the human aspect of this, I think processed is going to stay. If we're going to keep our alliteration going, does protein's popularity have staying power? Processed is going to be it's not processed equals poison. I think we're almost going to have that. I mean, if we're going to keep
I would push back from that, because I think you need to distinguish. First of all, we need to understand what are the mechanisms around ultra processed foods, and these are highly processed foods. What is it about them beyond the sugar, salt, fat that are leading to poor health outcomes? So we really need to understand that, and not enough energy and resources are being put into that. And you have people like Dr. Kevin Hall at the National Institutes of Health, but really, we should be pumping a lot more money, because the health of the nation is a risk here.
Let's think about this, though, Nick. A couple of reasons. And you can go back, dear listener, viewer. This is like episode 380. So go back. Mark Schatzker was in one of my early episodes, author of The Dorito Effect. And he talks a lot about flavoring, where nutrition and flavor are actually completely linked at the hip, walking up the aisle together. But the problem is we hijacked it with artificial flavoring. So your body might believe it's getting its dose of
protein,
its dose of vitamin C to keep you from having scurvy. And the thing is, all you're really getting is a damn dose of synthetic vitamin C and a Starburst piece of candy. And so he goes at great length to talk about how these artificial chemicals elicit the same thing as natural flavors associated with nutrition were, and your body knows, or your body thinks it knows. We've gotten smart. We outsmart our body in the lab and create a shit product that then makes the people fat. So when you talk about processed foods, I think that flavor, artificial flavoring, synthetic flavoring would be one of them, because then we have foods that are fairly devoid of nutrition, but they're also very tasty. And then we've got a consumer that just keeps putting it in their mouth until the bag runs out or the box runs out. So I think that's where the process thing is.
There's also an income and equity issue here as well, because it's all very well, saying we need to ban these foods and, they're making us they're sick. But for a lot of people, these are the only foods that they can afford. And so it's not helpful if you're on a low income just to start banning, essentially cordoning off parts of the supermarket without discussing, well, how can you make healthy food more affordable, which I think is a key part. You have to remember something like over half of the typical American diet comes from ultra highly processed foods, right?
RFK Jr. said 70%. He says that 70% of the American diet comes from, and now on a percentage of calories, I would say it probably is at least that, because when you think about it, you usually have caloric density in some of those. I don't. The number I hear is more 50%, but it's still a lot, right? It's not and so just by the fact that it's 50, 70% maybe in teenagers and younger people, it's by the way, if you're disagreeing with remember, you're disagreeing on the number. It's with RFK Jr. It's not with me. I'm telling you what he said. I don't mind if you disagree with RFK Jr. I think it's fine.
Okay, there we go. Well, we want to be science-backed wherever possible, but the point is it's a very high amount. It's not like in other parts of the world where highly processed foods are like, less than 10%. And so, because there may not be a problem with the foods themselves. It may just be that we're consuming too many of them. Right?
Nick, I got a couple questions for you running through the winners. I said pulses, lentils, garbanzo beans, edible peas and beans. I think there could be a real winner. And again, I'm not pulling for or against. I'm just thinking as a marketer navigating the future. I think protein stays hot. I think then that you can play that. I believe that if the beef people know what they're doing, and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association does not, they're not a marketing agency, they're a bunch of bureaucrats, they could really get on this about how recycling carbon, using cattle to manage an ecosystem, and also, creating protein that could capitalize on that. I think poultry remains a winner because it's inexpensive. You can still push the poultry, protein, poultry, and also if you're impoverished, let's stick with the alliteration again. If you're impoverished, poultry and protein are the thing. Am I right? The poultry stays a winner.
The idea, absolutely. The idea that, the problem is, and it's kind of how we got in this situation, is that protein compared to fats and carbs is oftentimes 2 or 3 times more expensive in terms of calories and what have you. And so there was a natural reason, if you're in a highly competitive food industry, to try and squeeze cost out. And so to what extent would you remove protein as the most expensive item and replace it with, like you say, artificial flavors and modified starches or whatever. Any minimally processed food has a great story to tell around ultra processed foods and promoting protein. The question is, do these organizations have the necessary marketing nous to kind of get the message over? And I think I would say from where I sit, I don't see them picking up on running with it in the same way that, pulses could and other fruits and vegetables. Anything minimally processed.
Eggs. My wife and I went to the grocery the other evening. Yeah. We go to the grocery here when we are at our winter place in Arizona, and it's got a bar. And so I'm able to convince my wife that going to the grocery is actually a date. We divide the list. Sometimes we walk around together like an old couple, and we pick up stuff. And then I'm always studying because of the business that I'm in. And then I said, good God, eggs are $3.59 a dozen. What's going on here? That's for the Kroger brand eggs. Do eggs remain a winner on the protein movement? I think they do, because they're still affordable source of protein. They're easily prepared, and they have a long shelf life. Am I right? Protein? Yeah,
I would put those in the same thing as well. Absolutely. Is there any affordability? Is there any losers?
The loser is the processed food. The loser is probably really carb intensive stuff. Is there any other losers as protein?
Yeah, I still think, I think personally, I feel that the whole plant-based protein or plant-based food movement kind of took a wrong turn when it tried to replicate meat rather than going down, let's take advantage of hundreds of years, if not thousands of years of vegetarian food cultures and recipes and go that way and make delicious food as opposed to try and use plants to recreate the meat experience. So I think those guys are still, unless they do something about the taste and the quality, are still going to be in problems.
As well as the texture. As well as the texture. They took some beet pulp and some pea powder and then grabbed some oil from Indonesia, palm oil, and amalgamated it together in a processing facility and then tried to say it tastes just like a burger. And you're like, this, first off, disgusting. It's highly processed and it doesn't taste like a burger at all. And so I agree with you. What if they just said, "Hey, let's just start with this pea protein, and make
or a bean burger, right? Let's start with something which isn't trying to be something more recognizable." But absolutely, when it comes to any new food product, anything that doesn't taste good, you're not going to sell it just on the sustainability story. You're not going to get that repeat purchase, especially if it's twice as expensive.
Now, one of your things you've described as the halo effect, that proteins never had it. Good carb, good fat, bad fat. There's just protein, and that doesn't have it. Does there end up being a bad protein? Does there end up like 5 years from now, does some marketing entity say our protein's superior because it doesn't have any of that bad protein? It's only the good protein.
Yeah, so it is interesting how that. I mean, the health halo is there for protein in the sense that it doesn't have the bad image, but it is. We know that protein isn't a single thing. It's amino acids, and some of those are essential because we can't make them in our body. We have to. I think there's about 10 of them, right? So I think it will. I think there's a huge opportunity for it to become more nuanced. You kind of see that if you were in the world of bodybuilding or something, then you suddenly get into the details there. The digestibility of certain proteins, or because we need, once you get into the nitty gritty, you need amino acids by varying proportions. Some you need a lot of, some you only need a tiny amount of. Yeah. So I think that type of nuance, again, is a terrific marketing opportunity in the making, right? If you're coming up with a protein that has an interesting amino acid profile, then that could be a wonderful marketing opportunity.
So I got another thought for you, and this is, I think, a fun one for us. If the RFK movement is that seed oils are bad, we use oils in a lot of stuff to fry all of our fried goods, and people think that's the only place. No, it's not just a deep fryer. It's also in a lot of our baked goods, whatever. I wonder if what might be good for protein is also good for fat. He says beef tallow. Well, where else do we saturate? Lard. I wonder if 5 years from now we're trying to breed our beef animals to have more fat content and have our pig have more fat content, so we can use that fat for where we're using so much oil now, which would ultimately be positive for protein because you can't have one without the other. You can't have beef protein and pig protein without also having the fat derived from it. Do you see that coming?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. So I have no idea how that would play out.
Nick, I'm an interesting guy. That's why I come up with these things. I mean, it's not surprising.
So I think, when you look at some of the things that RFK has said, it's kind of, well, he said a lot of different things. Which ones is he going to focus on? And whether it's the ultra-processed foods or the seed oils or maybe a protein story or a food as medicine type story. I mean, ultimately, one would like to believe that we're going to follow the science here around, what is safe for the consumer, and to what extent.
How long have you been in the United States? This thing about following the science, you realize that never really happens, right? We're told that we're doing that, but we're not really doing that. You realize?
Yeah, but this is the dilemma, right? Because we want to, as consumers, we want to not have to do our own research on all these subjects and feel at some level the dietary guidelines have
I feel it's my duty to take my new British friend from Rabobank to a Walmart in the year 2020 when the toy area was cordoned off with police tape, but you couldn't walk over there because you'd get coronavirus. But if you walked over in the section that sold potato chips, it was okay. If you believe there was anything scientific about that, you probably are mistaken. But anyway.
All right. Well, I yes, absolutely. So the point is, we've just the scientific committee that advises the upcoming dietary guidelines has just released a 420-page report with the latest, and I'm going to say state-of-the-art recommendations on science. I haven't yet to read it, so maybe that should be my weekend reading. But again, we know that there is a certain cycle in these trends, right? Yeah. And we know that we're at a low point in maybe some kinds of fats, and that may turn around. But we also know that So let's leave it at that. It's possible.
It's possible. All right. I think protein does have its popularity, has got staying power. I think we are going to see more of this. I think it's net positive for obviously animal agriculture. It's probably net positive for dairy because it seems like dairy seems to be riding a nice little rail right here where it's not being maligned and it gets lumped in casually enough on the protein side of it. I think it's a winner. I think actually plant-based, to Nick's point, if they stay in their lane instead of trying to take plant products and make them into steak, if they can just stay into plant-based protein, stays plant protein, I think there's some possible wins for them as well. Your final thought?
I'm going to have to agree with you on all those things. I think what you're going to see is a continuation in protein turning up in unexpected places in the supermarket. And
like you said, all of a sudden it's these aren't bad carbs in this box of Triscuits because they've got infused protein, and that's what you think is coming, where it's going.
Yeah, we're getting 5 grams of protein in gummy candies now. And that's probably a step too far.
Yeah, so we will see going through the grocery store, everything that used to be low fat is now going to be protein enhanced and to push the protein. I agree with that. So, by the way, check out my friends Redox. They're sponsor this show here in 2025, redoxgrows.com. It's talking about bio-nutrients that can help you get better crops using less inputs. And you know what? Probably backing off on some of the inputs you're using that maybe you've used too much of anyhow. And eventually there's going to be environmental scrutiny about that. Go to redoxgrows.com, redoxgrows.com to learn more. Also, I want you to, if you have a 2025 meeting coming up, please think about putting me on stage. You know what? I've been on stages for 31 years, speaking at agricultural events for the last 20 plus years. You know what? I like doing it, and your audience likes to have me there. So consider doing that. You can go to DamianMason.com, like on that sign right there behind me. Also, go to my YouTube channel and hit subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. It's free. Go to the YouTube channel. Just type in YouTube. We go to YouTube and just type in Damian Mason, and it's free. I'd love you to subscribe, and catch not only audios, but hear videos, watch videos with people like me and Nicholas Fereday. You said if we agreed on everything that it was going to be a boring show. So far, we only disagreed on the fact that you're a Beatles fan and I think they are overrated.
No, you assumed I was of a certain age and therefore a Beatles fan. But no, I'm much more into the Spice Girls than the Beatles.
So am I. So leave it right there. His name's Nicholas Fereday. If you want to get on his distribution list, I assume they can do that. He's with RaboResearch, part of Rabobank. He's the food and agribusiness executive director for food and consumer trends. They do a great job. They're the world's largest ag lender, and you should probably check it out. If they want to check out your newsletters you put out, where do they find that? Yeah,
just drop me a line. Drop me on my email.
Nicholas Fereday. And I tell you what, I can put it in my notes right there. But if you really want to know what it is,
put it in your notes. That would be very helpful.
I'll put it in my notes. There you go. His name is Nicholas Fereday. Thank you very much for being here. Until next time, I'm Damian Mason, and this is the Business of Agriculture. Are you an agricultural company looking to reach farmers and ranchers eager for your products and services? Look no further than Agvisor Pro. This innovative platform creates instantaneous connections between businesses and farmers who are interested in what you have to offer. By partnering with Agvisor Pro, you can engage directly with a targeted audience, answer questions in real time, and showcase your expertise in the industry. Don't miss this opportunity to grow your brand and connect with engaged customers. Join Agvisor Pro today, where farmers meet trusted companies just like yours in an instant. To learn more about partnering with Agvisor Pro to enhance your business, email them info@agvisorpro.com. That's info@agvisorpro.com.